Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham is one of India's premier top-ranked universities which focuses on transforming lives through learning, research and innovation. The university was established 19 years ago in the year 2003 and has made significant achievements in a short time. Education for life, education for living. Amrita University is guided by the thoughtfulness of our Chancellor, Amma, who laid down the philosophy of education for life by placing equal stress on education for a living. It is this vision that led to the establishment of a vast network of educational institutions that provide modern education while imparting the traditional values. While the pursuit of academic excellence forms the core of Amrita's success, it also undertakes the responsibility to shape the whole character of youngsters with love, care, and compassion. The university is headquartered at the foothills of the Western Ghats in Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu, and has 5 other campuses spread across South India in Amrithapuri, Kerala, Kochi, Kerala, Bengaluru, Karnataka, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, and Mysore, Karnataka. The university will soon launch its new campuses in Amravati, Andhra Pradesh, Faridabad, Delhi, NCR. Our inspiration, a renowned humanitarian leader and spiritual leader, Amba is the Chancellor and guiding light of Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham. Amma's concept of education, stress on research, and commitment to instilling universal values have come together to shape Amrita into an institution where the latest achievements and discoveries combined with compassion and service-mindedness. As Amma said in 2010, when the State University of New York presented her with an honorary doctorate in humane letters. Rankings. The multi-campus, multidisciplinary research establishment is ranked as 5th best university in India 2021 by National Institutional Ranking Framework, NIRF. We have also been accorded the status of Institute of Eminence, IOE, by the Ministry of Education, Government of India. A testament to our pursuit of excellence is the NAC A++ accreditation score, the highest possible. NAC accreditation measures universities for excellence in curricular aspects, teaching, learning and evaluation, research, innovations and extension, infrastructure and learning resources, student support and progression, governance, leadership and management, institutional values and best practices, global impact and international collaborations. Among the private educational institutions in the country, Amrita has entered into MOUs and collaborations with more than 450 leading universities around the globe. Students also benefit from our relations with industries and interactions with top management of multinational companies. These collaborations facilitate student exchange programs, student visits, industrial training, and project guidance under reputed corporate entities. Placements. Placements at Amrita have always been best in class with students usually having more than one job offer. Some students have up to 3 job offers by the end of their course from reputed MNCs, be it engineering, management, life sciences, arts or sciences. Amrita is a place where the world's best companies look for talent. More than 200 companies visit the campus every year, and the average salary offered to our students is 5.8 lakh per annum. Meanwhile, the highest package offered is 56.95 lakh per annum, and the highest stipend for internship is rupees 80,000 per month. Amrita's Technology Business Incubator, TBI, is a non-profit supported by the Government of India that funds, mentors, and nurtures ideas by startups and entrepreneurs. It focuses on developing innovations in the areas of information technology, cybersecurity, networking, social media, and more. The TBI startups have obtained multiple awards and recognition, both from India and across the globe. Till date, TBI has incubated more than 75 startups and mentored 216 startup ideas with 0% loss from investments. It funds up to 1 crore rupees per startup and has opened up many more funding options through its partnership with venture capital firms and angel investor networks. Amrita TBI is one of the only 6 incubators selected to be world-class under Niti Aayog's Atal Innovation Mission. Campus life, a home away from home. At Amrita, we believe in a holistic approach towards our students' development. To augment students' classroom learning, all campuses provide students with digital and central libraries, quiet study centers, seminar halls, e-learning studios, computer labs, and campus-wide free Wi-Fi. The university encourages both indoor and outdoor sports and games, and there are world-class swimming pools, gymnasiums, stadiums, and games arenas. Various clubs cater to the artistic and scientific minds of the students. If you look around all of Amrita's campuses, you will see the prevailing educational environment is in communion with nature. The sand, the seas, and the sky define the backdrop of these temples of learning. It vibrates with an energy of togetherness and encourages us to live in harmony with everything around us, including a unity within ourselves. This setting is suited to instill both learners and the learned with the courage and wisdom to face the challenges of life. The campus at Etimane is considered India's most picturesque. It is like an oasis in a desert. What started out as a barren landscape underwent a miraculous transformation through the university's tree planting project. Today, there are more than 1 lakh trees growing there, the most extensive collection in number and species on a university campus in South India. The Live-in Labs program originated from Amma's idea to bridge the rural and urban divide by sending university students to remote villages in India to understand the everyday difficulties faced by people living there. The program is designed to be a multidisciplinary real-life learning experience offered to both international participants and Amrita University's faculty and students. The lab's objective is to expose youths to day-to-day problems faced in rural communities with a 2-week to 6-month periods of live-in internships in Indian villages. It also aims to inspire them to dedicate the knowledge and skills they acquired at university to help develop practical, cost-effective solutions to the challenges faced by the villages. Researchers at Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham partner with senior scientists at world's leading research universities to innovate new ideas and invent new products, applying existing technology towards solving some of the world's most pressing problems, from disaster management to assuring access to education and the management and cure of diseases. This effort reflects in Amrita's national and international research rankings. India's first UNESCO Chair on Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality. Empowerment through Innovation and Technology. The Center for Women Empowerment and Gender Equality is a research-focused academic center for promoting gender equality and fostering women's empowerment, with a special focus on using technology and other innovative methods. This center will offer diverse courses in key focus areas, pilot radical ideas, and collaborate with leading universities and institutions. The Amala Bharadam Campaign, ABC, Clean India Campaign, was a program pioneered by Amrita, aimed at improving public health and restoring India's physical beauty. The project was launched in 2010 during Amma's 57th birthday celebrations, and through this campaign, volunteers undertake periodic cleaning of roads, markets, temples, government offices, and hospitals. As a part of this campaign, garbage was sorted and either recycled or properly disposed of. Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, along with Kerala's Prisons and Correctional Services and Tamil Nadu Prison Department, initiated Amrita Yoga classes and IIM Technique meditation sessions in 2018 to address and transform the physical, mental, and emotional health of prison inmates. Our goal is to teach yoga and meditation techniques to help the prison inmates become more self-aware. They learn to breathe with awareness and manage emotions through these exercises. Ours is a changing world. It needs people who can adapt to change, with minds that can expand and include change, and yet hold human-friendly values that can withstand all changes. Which is why the world needs education that shapes the minds of these people, and which is why the world needs Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham. Education for life, education for living. A university where future is driven by imagination. Experiential learning creates diverse opportunities, where industry exposure and international partnerships help you sail. Come, start your journey towards success with Amrita University.
There's a place where the best minds come together, work to end inequalities, work towards transforming lives. This is a place recognized as one of the world's best universities. This is Amrita, now ranked among the top 100 universities in the world and ranked #1 in India. Amrita University.
There's a reason why we pick up the highest grades nationally and internationally, year after year after year. That reason is you. Now, with an A++ accreditation from NAC and consistent rankings among the top universities in NIRF, Amrita, we get recognized because you must.
Dear participants, thank you. Let's wait one more minute for the more participants to come in. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So let's start this session. Very good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Saturday series. Today's topic is about lab on chip, future diagnostic tool. Today's section will enlighten us on the significance of modern diagnostic tools in clinical analysis and innovative solutions, which help us to develop affordable and accessible healthcare for everyone. The talk will also highlight some of the emerging methods to develop diagnostic solutions that can potentially revolutionize healthcare management. Well, today we have two fabulous faculties from Amrita Vishwavidyapita. First one, Dr. T.G. Sadish Babu sir. He is the research head of School of Physical Science, head of Amrita Biomedical Engineering. Second faculty, Dr. Arati Pradeep. She is the assistant professor of Department of Science and research fellow at Biosensor Research Lab, Amrita University. So before getting to the session, if any of the participants have queries, please type it in the chat box. Well, I welcome both of you to the session. Therefore, we can start the series. Over to you, Sadish sir.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. Let me share my screen at first. Hope I'm audible to you.
Yes, sir.
So my screen is visible to you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what you see here is as you have seen in the video, this is the Amrita campus at Coimbatore at the foothills of the Western Ghats, the clean and green campus at Coimbatore. And regarding our talk today, the future diagnostics, and typically with the help of lab on a chip type of devices. So when we think about clinical analysis and clinical diagnostics, immediately these kind of images come to our mind. We need to go to a sophisticated clinical lab where we have trained technicians and sophisticated instruments. We need to give the sample, blood or the other kind of samples, and we have to wait for some time and then we get the result. So the problem with this kind of analysis, this can only be done at a very sophisticated clinical lab and where we have very trained technicians. So obviously these kind of clinical labs and system may not be available everywhere, typically at a rural place. So this brings us the analysis. Typically we meant something like at the point of care testing devices. So hope you are familiar with, or at least you have come across these kind of devices, what is seen on the screen. The first one, what you see here is the glucometer. The grandparents who are having the diabetes, they often test the glucose. So, and those testing are actually conducted at home. We don't nowadays go to a clinical lab for the glucose testing. Likewise, the other one, what you see here is the pregnancy test strip. Earlier, when women get pregnant, they go to a clinical lab or to a doctor to confirm the pregnancy. Nowadays, the same thing people do at home. So this is what we typically call as the point of care testing device. And this type of analysis or diagnosis does not require a sophisticated clinical lab or a trained technician to help us in doing the analysis. This type of analysis we do at our home at our convenience. We don't have to be in the queue for the analysis. So this is actually provide a lot of advantages because we can do the monitoring by ourselves. And we can also conduct community testing in addition to the other advantages which I have already mentioned. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, says that a diagnostic device for developing countries should be assured. That means it must be affordable, sensitive, specific, user-friendly, must be rapid and robust, equipment-free, and deliverable to end users. So when we develop devices of this kind, the point of care testing devices, it must be assured, as WHO said, it must satisfy these conditions which I just mentioned. And obviously, these kind of devices, they work with the help of a biosensor. And those who are new to this term, biosensors, it is actually a device that translates the biological event into a measurable signal. So it's not something very new, in fact, because we look at this image, we can find a lot of sensors here. For example, eyes are the best sensors. They are the best optical sensors. They take the image, translate in the way we want, and it's stored properly. Likewise, the nose and tongue. Nose is actually a gas sensor, whereas tongue sends the solution. So they are actually the great sensors. Without any crosstalk, it sends any number of parameters. And so the biosensor actually not a very new topic or a novel idea, which has been happening for the millions of years. And if I put it pictorially, as in the modern terms, this is how we see the biosensor. Biosensor, which consists of a biorecognition element that recognize the sample. So we have the bioreceptor, then transducer, then we get the amplified signal the way we want to see it, as a display or as a signal, like that. So the devices which I was mentioning, like the glucose sensors, the glucometer, and the pregnancy test strip or the urinalysis strip, they are actually the typical biosensors. We translate the biological event into a measurable signal, and we use it for our convenience. So basically, in all these cases, we just try to translate an idea into a prototype or a device. So that ideation is very, very important. And most of the time, we take the idea from the nature, or some of the thing which really happen in the living system, we try to translate as a device. So this is actually the real excitement which I always talk about. When we translate an idea into a working prototype, or ultimately into a device, and when finally that goes to the public for the societal benefit, that's a real excitement. And we actually try to show you some of the excitement which we could do in our lab at Coimbatore campus. And before we go into the device development, I just tell you one more point on the translational research. So we do research in the lab, and we try to develop, most of the scientists, they try to develop something new. But finally, we need to translate our ideas, the working ideas, into some devices or prototype, so that it goes to the public. So that is what I really mean, the translation of some idea into a working prototype. This is actually a simple example of the development of a glucose sensor and a glucometer, which we carried out some years back in our Coimbatore campus. So as I said, here also we tried with the conventional research type of thing, but slowly we translated into a smaller prototype, then finally like a working prototype, then into a device. So this is actually the typical translational research, I mean, that involves a lot of steps, a lot of patience that we require, because most of the people stop research at this point of time, because they learn something new, they publish, they get the credit, and by the time they start another new idea to work with. And going beyond this stage is requires a lot of effort, lot of patience required to do this, and lot of time, lot of energy, lot of money involved in this kind of research. So the examples which we're trying to show in the subsequent slide largely belong to this kind of research, where we translate science into a technology, finally into the product. So here the type of sensor which I showed you in the previous slide, it's actually the glucose sensor, which we really use the nanomaterials for the sensing. So as you see from this type of a handmade prototype to a completely fabricated device and the sensor. So this is what typically involved in most of the translational research. And by this time, people get the patent. Then some industry who really want to market this kind of product, they take the technology and they do mass production and it goes to the market. That's how the whole journey of translating some laboratory type of research experiment to a product. So this is what I was telling about the couple of patents we received for this particular invention. Now let's go to the topic of lab on a chip, where we try to translate the whole laboratory activities onto a chip. So in the previous example, I was trying to tell you one type of sensing. There may not be much of complex laboratory process involved. But when we talk about a lab on a chip, where a lot of laboratory activities, the process, what we do like centrifugation, dilution, mixing, amplification, and other reactions, all that we try to conduct on a chip. So the advantage of this type of devices are actually, we don't have to really depend on a clinical laboratory for the analysis to carry out. So a chip that can carry out multiple analysis at our convenience, as we were trying to say about the glucometer and the pregnancy test strip kind of device. So we can conduct the clinical analysis at our home or a public health center or with the help of an ASHA worker. That kind of a device where we can bring the technology to a common man without much of sophisticated laboratories or trained technicians involvement. So this is how we picked in a pictorially we represent a lab translated onto a chip. And you can see here some images where we have a small handheld device which directly take the sample and do the complete analysis, and finally we get the reading from the samples. So this is one example which we have tried in our lab, where we tried bringing multiple analysis on a chip with the help of biosensors. And another area which Dr. Arathi will explain on the microfluidics, and then on the electronics. And in between, computational simulation also to optimize the design. And also regarding the microelectronics and the programming, a bit of computer science also. So this is typically a multidisciplinary translational research, where we start with nanotechnology, biotechnology, chemistry, physics, all of them we use for the development of sensors. Then the developed sensors integrate with the microfluidics. Then that will be connected with the microelectronic system for the measurement. So here, just to understand the multidisciplinary nature of the problem, you can see here, as I said, the lab on a chip. I just call it as 3 major areas involved in it. And every area, again, involving multiple aspects of studies. And that give you multiple levels of the development of the sensor. If I talk in terms of the sensor, then the testing of the sensor, validation, likewise in every area. So this is not just the effort of only a single person. And wherever you come across this kind of research, that involves a lot of discipline and lot many people involved in this kind of research with multiple expertise. And I just talk about biosensor at first. Then here in this particular system, we tried in bringing 5 different type of sensors, typically sensors for glucose, cholesterol, uric acid, creatinine, and bilirubin. And all these sensors developed by using nanomaterials. So before we go into the sensor, I just give you some idea about the nano, those who are new to this technology. And it's all about the dimension different, because the conventional dimensions we talk about meters, centimeters, all that, and we are very familiar with that. So for example, as you see on the screen here, size of our size, the dimension, it's order of meters. And I don't think any confusion on this. And again, size of a fly, order of centimeters, 1-2 centimeters, like that. And the hair diameter, we know it is 0.1 mm, close to that of 0.1 millimeter. That's nothing but 10 to the power minus 4 meter. And we can see this dimension very clearly without any confusion. And even little smaller items also we can see. That's why I put limit of eyesight is 10 to the power minus 5 meter. So up to this, we will be able to see 10 to the power minus 5 meter. So beyond this dimension, anything smaller than this, we won't be able to see. But normally we say that that is something very so small we are unable to see by naked eye. But the world which we don't see by naked eye is very big. That's what I'm trying to say. See the size of bacteria, which is 10 to the minus 6 meter, the order of microns, we won't be able to see. Or anything smaller like virus, DNA, most of the biomolecules in the body, they are all very small, which we don't see. So when we go like that, typically the size of DNA or most of the biomolecule, which is of the order of nanometer. And that is actually the dimension which I'm trying to speak with you. When we bring down the material size into nano, a lot of new properties will be evolving. Say, for example, the gold. When we talk about metallic gold, we know it is of yellow in color with metallic luster. But when we translate that gold into nano particles of gold, typically of 20 or 10 nanometer size, we see that they are kind of ruby red in color, right? A wine red colored particle or wine red colored solution we'll see. So the yellow colored gold, change it into a red colored gold solution for the particles of red color. And because of us, some of you might have come across the term surface plasmon resonance. That means the optical property completely changed. Likewise, when we change the material into smaller dimension, its electrical property change, catalytic property change. So likewise, most of the property will be changed. So most of the scientists who work in the area of nanotechnology or nanomaterials or nanoscience, they capitalize these properties of nanomaterials, the special properties which occur only at the nano dimension. So here I'm trying to tell you some more examples where we could use nanomaterials for the sensing application. For example, here what you see here on the screen is a sensor electrode like the conventional glucose sensing electrode. Instead of modifying with the glucose oxidase type of enzyme, we have modified it with nanoparticles which are selectively catalyzing the glucose oxidation. And I don't want to say more about the testing process and all that. So then it is tested and we validate it. Here, instead of working with the biomolecule like protein, because we know enzymes are protein, they have got a lot of disadvantages because they can't withstand high temperature. They cannot be stored at normal conditions. All that drawbacks, because they are protein, they get denatured. Suppose if you work with these inorganic nanomaterials, they are highly stable. So you can work with them without any problem. So that is why we tried making use of nanomaterials for the sensing applications. So the storage stability will not be a problem at all. So this is one example, because I was telling you, I'm trying to explain a lab-on-a-chip device where we bring 5 different sensors together. So this is another sensor on the creatinine, because we know creatinine is a very good kidney biomarker. So any problem associated with kidney, that can easily be monitored by looking at the creatinine level. So here what we have done is used a very similar type of printed electrode, and on which we have coated with copper nanoparticles. And these nanoparticles are selectively making complex with creatinine. Copper creatinine complex, coordination complex. You all might be familiar with the term coordination complex. It forms copper creatinine coordination complex, and the dissolution of that happens, and fresh surface area will be exposed, and that current will be measured. A very simple chemistry we utilize to translate the sensing of creatinine onto a plastic strip. Likewise, for the bilirubin also, we used a special type of carbon material for the sensing. Similarly, we have used developed nanomaterials for the sensing of uric acid and cholesterol, because I said about 5 different sensors which we are trying to integrate with the lab-on-a-chip device. So once all the sensors are developed, we integrate that with the microfluidic system for the testing. Because when we use microfluidics, the advantage is that where we have a fluid, directly we test it inside the fluid sample, because you just recall my explanation on the glucometer and the glucose sensor. There we have a dry strip on directly which we give the blood sample. So all the reactions which happens on the strip are the solution, the sample that interacts with the solid electrode material. But when we do it inside a lab-on-a-chip device that utilizes a microfluidic system, here the testing is conducted in the liquid phase as you test it in a beaker. So naturally, the accuracy of the measurement will be very high compared to a dry strip. That is why we have gone with this kind of a microfluidic system, where we bring the microfluidics along with multiple electrodes. So with a drop of sample, we will get the readings of multiple parameters, like as you see here, glucose, cholesterol, creatinine, uric acid, and bilirubin. And the accuracy of this measurement will be very high, much higher than the other type of measurement. So I just transfer this to Dr. Arathi to speak about the microfluidics. And at the end of the presentation, I again come back. Thank you. Arathi, you may please share the screen.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
So yes, Professor Satish was talking about lab-on-a-chip devices. Now, the main function of a lab-on-a-chip device is that you're trying to translate whatever is happening at the laboratory onto a single chip. So all the laboratory operations like mixing, washing, mixing, dilution, all those laboratory operations which are actually performed by trained technicians in the laboratory, you're trying to automate and bring it on chip. So typically, this lab-on-a-chip which we developed for sensing 5 different biomolecules, it has got a disposable component and a non-disposable component. So the non-disposable component is a meter module. Just a second. So the non-disposable component is a meter module. So this meter module will contain all the electronics that is required to power these sensor electrodes and to take out the readings. It will also have a display so that the amount of these biomolecules which is present will be quantified directly on this screen. This is the non-disposable meter module. It will also have a disposable chip. Now this disposable chip is the part that will be handling these samples. All the biological samples will be handled by this disposable chip. And it is in this disposable chip, we will be mimicking these laboratory operations. Now, in the development of this particular lab on a chip for the monitoring of glucose, cholesterol, uric acid, and bilirubin, we need to mix the sample with a corresponding reagent before the analysis can be done on the biosensor. So my requirement here is that I need to mix the sample with its corresponding reagent before the analysis can be done. So this is how the chip will look like. It has got a set of micro channels here. Now we'll see what microfluidics is. Now, as sir has already mentioned, the development of this lab on a chip is totally multidisciplinary. It has got electronics, it has got biosensors, and you have a component called microfluidics. Now we have already seen what biosensors is. Now let's see the microfluidics part of it. Now, what is microfluidics? As the name implies, it is fluid flow typically happening in the micro regime. So you have a channel, or you have a channel where at least one dimension of the channel is in the micro regime. Now, why do you need micro devices? We are looking at point of care testing. So we are trying to miniaturize whatever is there in the laboratory to a small chip. And when you're miniaturizing the entire device, you're going to bring down the size of the device. So you're going to bring down the size of the device even where the fluid is being handled. So that is where you have microfluidics. You have flow or sample, the reagent, all these flow happening in the microfluidic regime. Now there are several advantages when you try to bring down the size of a device to miniature, when you're trying to miniaturize the device. Some of the advantages being lower fluid consumption, because you're having a small device typically capable of handling microliters of sample. So you obviously have lower fluid consumption. You can have advantages like lower fabrication costs, fast response time, small power consumption, because when you're going to have a smaller device, the amount of power consumed is also going to be less. So you're going to have small power consumption, low dead volumes. So the amount of sample that is being wasted or the reagents that is being wasted will go down. It is possible to manipulate liquids by means of electric heating or ultrasonic waves. Typically, you're going to handle only microliters, and handling these fluids within these micro networks become much easier. That is, you can predict the fluid flow through these kind of devices, and you can have increased throughput. By this increased throughput in the sense, you will be able to do multiplexed operations. With a single drop, you are able to quantify multiple biomarkers. So this is increasing the throughput of the device. Now, there are challenges when you try to bring down the size of the device from the macro scale to the micro scale. One of the major challenges being the flow physics will change. Typically, when you are comparing a flow where you have a fluid flow happening through a pipe versus a small channel, the flow is going to be different. In a macro scale where you have like gravitational effects being considered, when you bring down the size to this micro scale, the gravitational effect might not even be considerable. It might be negligible. And new effects like maybe surface tension, such effects will come into picture. So it is important that you know the physics of the fluid flow before you start designing a lab on a chip device. Now, how do you develop a lab on a chip device? So this is a workflow, how you develop a lab on a chip device. You start with the design aspect. Now you design it based on your requirements. Now, for example, if you want to mimic a laboratory operation where you have mixing of two fluids, then you need to design a micro mixer. Now, if you want to design a lab on a chip device that handles multiple fluids, then you need to have flow control. So in that case, you start designing valves for micro flow control. So depending on your requirements, you start designing. The next one is simulation studies. Now, what is simulation studies? Simulation studies is that you model your design in a computer software. You try to give in all the parameters. You're trying to mimic the real model into a computer model, and you're going to study it using a computer. It is a simulation study. Now, why do you need a simulation study? Once you start simulating the device performance, in case there are some errors, it will be easier for you to correct. In case you don't do a simulation study, you directly design it and then fabricate it, the amount of cost and the amount of time you're going to spend is going to be much higher. So it is always ideal you go for simulation studies and try to predict the performance of your designed micro components before you start fabricating it. So by simulation studies, you will be able to predict the design, the performance of the design, the efficiency of the operation you're looking at. And then once you have optimized the design, you fabricate it. Now, there are different methods of fabricating. Now, this fabrication, typically you're talking about micro fabrication. You are you're going to fabricate small microstructures. There are different techniques for fabrication, including additive manufacturing techniques, subtractive techniques. Now, in subtractive techniques, you take a bulk material and you carefully machine it. You have techniques like that. You have the emerging 3D printing techniques, and you have techniques like photolithography. As in photolithography, you typically take a substrate, you coat it with a photoresist, and you pattern that photoresist, or this photoresist is nothing but a photosensitive polymer. So you pattern this photosensitive polymer using light. In that way, you'd be able to create microstructures that has got high resolution. So depending on your requirements, you can fabricate your design after you've optimized it by simulation studies. After you've fabricated, the performance of each of these microfluidic components, maybe if you've developed micro mixer or micro valve, you validate the performance of each of these fabricated micro components by doing some testing. And after you have validated its performance, you will integrate multiple components, all the microfluidic components which you have developed in order to mimic that laboratory operation. You will integrate all of them together onto a single chip. And after you integrate all the microfluidic components on a single chip, you will integrate the biosensors which you have developed and the microelectronics to form the final device. And this final device will again be tested and the performance should be validated. So this is a workflow of how you develop a lab on a chip device. In the coming slides, I'll show you how we developed a micro mixer. So the requirement here was I wanted to mimic a laboratory operation. Here I wanted to mimic the mixing operation in laboratory. So here, the A figure which you see here, you have got a blue and red region, right? So it is like this the middle region here where I'm pointing, this will represent the sample inlet. So I have a requirement where I need to sense 3 different biomarkers. Okay, I give a sample of blood and I need to measure 3 different biomarkers. So for that, I'm going to use 3 different sensors. So I'm going to position these 3 sensors at the outlets here. And at the inlet, I give a sample drop of blood. And since I need to detect 3 different biomolecules, each of these biosensors will have its own specific reagent. And so for mixing the reagent and the sample, I have 3 separate inlets for the secondary reagents. And at these outlets, I'll place the sensor. And when I give a negative pressure for the fluid to flow, I'll have fluid flow happening. So I'll have the sample flowing through here. And here in the side inlets, I've got the secondary inlet. And all of them will reach the outlet where I'm going to place the sensor electrodes. Now, these are 5 different designs. In the first design, you only have straight channels. You have the fluid flow happening in the straight channel. And in figure B, in the second figure, you have a design where you have increased the time of contact between the 2 streams. And the 3 figures below, C, D, and E, they refer to microchannels that has got meander-shaped geometry. Now, what we've done here is we've tried to analyze what happens to mixing if we have only straight channel and what happens when you have meander-shaped microchannels. If you look at straight channels alone, you see that at the outlet, the mixing is incomplete. See, you are giving a value of 0. The blue represents 0 and the red represents 1. So optimum mixing will show you a value of 0.5 at the outlet. But if you look at straight channels, you see distinct red and blue regions, which means that the mixing is not complete. This is how typically flow happens in a microchannel. It is called a laminar flow. The fluid streams will just flow parallel to one another and mixing happens only at the interface. At the interface, you have some diffusion and you have mixing happening. But you all know the mixing is a very slow, mixing by diffusion alone is going to be a very slow process. And that is why at the end of the channel, you have distinct red and blue regions. But when I integrate these meander-shaped microchannels into my design, I see that I get faster mixing. The mixing is almost complete. So this is a method of optimizing the design based on simulation studies. So based on this, I understood that having meander channels in my design will improve the rate of mixing. So once I've optimized the design, I fabricate the design using a technique called photolithography here. Typically, we take a substrate and we coat a photosensitive polymer and we pattern it carefully. After we fabricate it, we validate the performance of the device using colored solutions. Because I'm looking at a micro mixer, I initially evaluated its performance using colored solutions. So I've got 2 different colors and I applied a negative pressure and both these fluids pass through these micro channels and I have a uniform solution at the outlet. After I validated the performance of these micro mixers, we'll first integrate sensors, biosensors with this microfluidic chip. So this is the chip which we have fabricated that has got the microchannels. We integrate that with the biosensors. We given different samples. So we given blood sample that has got uric acid, cholesterol, in order to quantify uric acid, cholesterol, creatinine, bilirubin, and glucose. We give 5 different sensors here. Excuse me. And we give we connect a syringe to the outlet for the fluid to flow. We first validate the performance of this kind of a chip using a conventional laboratory equipment. So we've got an electrochemical analyzer, that is an equipment. And using that equipment, we first validate the performance of these sensors. After we validate the performance of these sensors, now this validation is being done using a laboratory equipment, a big bulky equipment that's a benchtop equipment. But we are looking at point of care testing, right? We can't take this bulky equipment everywhere we want to go and do the analysis. So in order to miniaturize the electronics part of it, we bring in the electronics module. So this consists of a set of microelectronic chips. It's a microelectronic circuit. So that has got multiple microcontrollers and potentiostats. And ultimately, we developed a small handheld device instead of the bulky equipment which we have in a typical laboratory. We developed a small handheld device. So this is the non-disposable meter module, and we'll be connecting our chip here. So this chip will have the microfluidics and the biosensors, and we quantify all the 5 different parameters in one go. So we'll get the values displayed here. So this is fine. This is how we finally integrated with the lab on a chip with the meter. So we integrate the meter, we integrate the biosensors and the microfluidics part, and we develop the lab on a chip device. So this is one example. We have received a US patent for this invention. Now this is how we develop a lab on a chip device for quantifying 5 different biomarkers. Now this is we are showing you another example where we are developing a lab on a chip device for the early detection of cancer. Now, in most of the cancer cases, you all know cancer is a very dangerous disease. And why is it so dangerous is because usually the diagnosis happens at an advanced stage, maybe in the 3rd stage or a 4th stage. And usually when the diagnosis happens at a later stage, the chances of survival goes down. Even if the person survives, sometimes the quality of life is affected. So what can be done to detect cancer at an early stage? If you can detect cancer at an early stage, then the chances of survival increases and the quality of healthcare can also be improved. So what is to be done in order to detect cancer at an early stage? Usually when a person is affected with cancer, the amount of certain proteins in the body, it goes up. For example, if a person is affected with breast cancer, the amount of a protein called HER2, human epidermal growth factor receptor 2, the amount of that protein shoots up in blood in the initial stages. So if you can quantify that shoot up of those proteins initially, you'll be able to do an early diagnosis. Now, how can you detect that? How can you do the early diagnosis of that? So what we've done is we have developed novel electrochemical sensors that can detect even small concentration increase in these proteins in the initial stages. So this is so typically for the development of such biosensors, these proteins, they are typically called antigens, and you will have antibodies that can be immobilized on the sensor electrode, like how we saw in the first slide. The development of biosensor, you can modify the biosensor with antibodies that are highly specific to these cancer antigens or the cancer biomarkers. And this kind of an assay is typically called an immunoassay. And these kinds of sensors are called immunosensors. So using nanotechnology, we develop highly sensitive and selective electrochemical sensors that can, electrochemical immunosensors in particular, to detect these trace amounts of proteins. That is in the early stages of cancer, when this protein level shoots up, the sensors will be able to quantify it. Now, typically, this kind of a biosensor development will require multiple steps. So first we need to place the antigen, then the secondary antibody. There are a lot of steps involved in the development of these immunosensors. So usually in a laboratory, trained technicians are required for this. Now, if you want to use this kind of a device for point of care applications, you need to automate this entire assay. So how do you bring about the automation of this assay? In order to bring out the automation of the assay and make it into a lab on a chip device, you will need something called a micro valve, because you need sequential delivery of these multiple fluids. So here you can see a lab on a chip device, which consists of micro valves for the control of different fluids. So this was developed recently in our lab at Amrita Vishwavidyapitham. So typically, if you have 4 different fluids, and you can see here, we have 4 different valves, and we can sequentially switch on each of these valves and achieve sequential flow of these fluids. Now, the beauty of such kind of device is that this will enable automation of the entire process. Since we are using a microcontroller, we can tell the device when the first valve should be actuated, when the second valve should be actuated. All these operations can be totally automated. And when you have an automated process, you have minimal user intervention. So all the user needs to do is place the sample that's got the analyte, which is to be detected. So the user just needs to place a sample and the entire operation is automated. So this is how we develop a lab-on-a-chip device for an automated immunoassay. Some more of the other devices which are being used for point of care applications will be continued by Dr. Satish Babu. Sir, if you can.
Hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah. So I just continue with a couple of more simpler devices which we have recently developed.
Second.
Yeah. So this is on a paper-based diagnostic device. But we have been discussing about a type of plastic strips that finally modified and used for the sensing applications. But here we try to use a simple paper strip for the analysis, because as we know, the paper strips have got a lot of advantages. Because one very important thing is she has been explaining about the microfluidics, patterning of a polymeric material to create micro patterns and the microfluidics flow to finally happen. But here, the beauty of paper, as it is, it has got microfluidics. Its pore size is typically like of microfluidics in nature. So we can do all the microfluidic analysis on a paper strip without much of modifications or fabrication steps involved. And it has got other advantages, like we need to have only very low sample volume, low cost, and they are flexible, portable, fast reactions, and biodegradable. You don't have to have, she was explaining about the negative pressure, but here you don't have to apply any pressure for the fluid flow to happen, because capillary flow will be happening. And you can modify the paper strip in such a way that multiple analysis can be possible. So there are a lot of advantages on using a paper strip. So that is why we have been working with paper strips. And as you see on the paper strip here, one second. Yeah, as you see here, these are actually the sensor wells she was explaining in the microfluidics. So that kind of sensing wells can easily be created on paper strip, and we can bring the reagent what gives characteristic reaction and color to the color with the sample. That all can be incorporated on a paper strip without much of difficulties. And as is represented here, you see towards down, the color intensity increases. It's actually a pictorial representation, not the actual one. But here you can see with the increase in concentration of the sample, the color intensity increases. So what I'm speaking is actually with the colorimetry detection of samples by making use of paper strips. So one interesting example, and which is having very high relevance in the current scenario, is on the liver function test. You know, when people have stomach or related problem, doctor asks us to do the liver function test. We simply call it as LFT. And this LFT consists of analysis of multiple biomarkers, typically bilirubin, protein, and the other liver enzymes like alkaline phosphatase, aspartate transaminase, and alanine transaminase. There are 5 biomarkers which are very commonly analyzed. So we tried incorporating all the 5 analysis on a paper strip. You can see here, this is on a bilirubin analysis. With increase in concentration of bilirubin, we can see an increase in color intensity. This is very simple. We actually tried creating gall nanoparticle on the paper. So the precursor for the gall nanoparticle, we put it on the paper as a reagent. So when we introduce the sample, in situ reaction happens and the color of the paper strip change. So that's what we have done here. We could see that with increase in concentration of bilirubin, the color also got increased. You can see here, we have developed a color band for the visual interpretation of the result. Then likewise, this is on the AST, aspartate transaminase. We could see an increase in color with increase in concentration of the liver enzyme. So here also, as I explained, here we have incorporated the reagent on the paper strip, but when we introduce the sample, the color intensity increased. Likewise, for the other enzyme, ALT, alanine transaminase enzyme, and alkaline phosphatase, and finally on the protein. So we could do all these analysis separately, like as you see here, and we could validate it with the laboratory samples and also with the real samples and patient samples. That means we have collected blood samples and tested with these paper devices. So we could see an increase in color for each of these biomarkers, and we were able to quantify. We also used the computational methods, the image processing method also for the quantification, but for a simple analysis without any bringing in much of more complicated tools, here we can easily make use of this color band for the quantification. Probably many of you have come across with the pH papers, where we have a color code, and just by looking at the color code and we can correlate the pH. Exactly in a similar manner, we can quantify these liver biomarkers on a paper strip. So I was telling you, normally all these 5 are tested together. That is, so we have to incorporate all these biomarkers on a single paper strip. So you can see here this pictorial representation, a schematic representation of fabricating this paper device. You see a flower-like pattern here. This pattern we make it on a paper. Then the corresponding reagent for each of these biomarkers we incorporate with the paper strip. Then, since we want to test with the blood sample directly, because as I was mentioning at the beginning, we are aiming point of care analysis with this strip. So we won't be depending on any clinical lab or a technician for this. So we must be able to do something like a finger prick and place the blood sample directly. So we know blood sample is red in color. So if we directly put the blood sample, that red color interfere with the color develop. So we wanted to filter the blood and take only the plasma, because plasma contains all these proteins and other biomarkers. So we need only plasma for the analysis. So what we call as the serum separator membrane we use here. That membrane can separate serum from the blood sample. So that we place with the paper strip. Then when we introduce the blood sample, we can see a color change. This is how like a stamp size paper strip can do analysis of all these 5 biomarkers together. And you can see some of the actual tested samples are here. These are actually these flower type architectures. They are actually a single strip that can simultaneously test all the 5 biomarkers together. And with the help of the color code, which I was explaining, the color band, you can quantify, or at least a semi-quantitative analysis we can do. So this will find a lot of potential in community screening, or in typically in rural places where we need to, where we don't have any access to the bigger clinical laboratories. We can have a screening and look at the color and say whether you need to see a trained doctor on this particular area. So that's the advantage of this. And to have the quantification of this, we have developed a an electronic meter, as she was explaining, the electronic meter that is used for the lab on a chip device. In a similar manner, we have an electronic meter that, so we can test this color intensity with the help of this meter, and we can get the reading. That is one thing. And also we can make use of the mobile camera for the quantification. With the help of the app, we can quantify. And another option also what we have tried is, we can translate the reading which we obtain with the help of this electronic meter onto a doctor who is sitting at the hospital through the help of the network connectivity. So we can do the analysis at our convenience or at a rural place, but we can translate the data or send the result to a doctor for his expert opinion. So that kind of analysis also we could carry out. But the major advantage of this is, it is such a small paper strip that could do multiple analysis, where whatever the microfluidics advantages which we have been talking about, all that could be incorporated onto a paper strip. And so far I have been talking about so many sophisticated technology we use to make the point of care device. But here I just want to give you an example of a frugal innovation for the testing of anemia. We know the hemoglobin content that actually tested to understand whether a person is anemic or not. So we can do that analysis without much of sophistication. So here a simple device developed in the lab that can be used for the testing of hemoglobin. It just have a DC motor and a plastic paddle, and which can be powered with a DC battery, a 9-volt battery. So even without power, you can do the analysis. Just we need to have only a battery. And because of this, such a simple innovative idea, the student who invented this got the Gaiety Award from the Vice President of India. And later we have translated that onto a better device with more aesthetics and all that we brought in. It is such a small, this is like a tumbler sized one, a very small device. We can have the battery, everything inside this device, and we just need to have a finger prick, take the sample inside a capillary tube and place it in the device here. So we can do the analysis wherever we want. So the importance of this device is, because we know in many of the rural villages, lot of adolescent girls, they are actually suffering the problem of anemia, and also the pregnant women. So they do not have access to the sophisticated clinical laboratory for the testing. So in those places, this type of device will find a lot of importance. And what will be in the future? And we have been talking about like handheld devices, which can be used at our home or rural places, or at where the doctor do the consultation, like an OP. In all that places we can make use of the devices, the kind of devices which we have been discussing. But I'm trying to tell you something still simpler, which can do continuous analysis. Say, as you see here, if you want to do the electrophysiological parameters like EEG, EMG, ECG, etc., we need to go to the sophisticated clinical lab, and we have to connect with these kind of electrodes, so many electrodes, to have the EEG to be measured, or EMG, something like this, or ECG. Again, you are all familiar with this kind of measurement. Can you just think about how we can do this analysis without the help of these kind of sophisticated equipment or the technicians? I'm just giving you a glimpse of that kind of devices. Or in fact, they are like a tattoos, the tattoos, as you see the bottom panel here. This entire measurement, EEG, EMG, the electrolytes, a lot of that kind of parameters can be measured by these type of tattoos, which are fixed on your hand or head or neck. So that way we can do the measurement, that too measurement on a continuous manner. Because most of the devices which I was explaining already, they all do with an intermittent measurement. Whenever you want to do the measurement, you take the sample and do the measurement. But here, when we fix the tattoo on the body, that tattoo continuously measures the parameter and can communicate to a nearby device. So we feel that these kind of devices will be the future. And I can show you some more example. See here, a wristband kind of thing that measure a lot of metabolites, electrolytes, and the electrophysiological parameters. So they are simpler devices that they can be either fixed on the body like a tattoo, or we can wear the device and that device will continuously monitor multiple parameters together. And some of the examples which are reported in the literature, you can see the tattoo which is fixed on the ear here or on the arm, likewise. So they are actually very simple devices that can monitor either a single parameter or multiple parameters together. So without going to a clinical laboratory, that's what we said at the very beginning. Then we said about the point of care testing devices, which we have some examples already in the market, and many people work across the globe to develop many point of care testing devices. And country like India, we have a lot of importance for that kind of devices, because a lot of people who live in the rural environment, and there we have poor access to the clinical setup. And this is actually the third type of devices which I am talking, which is on the epidermal electronic type of systems, where we fix a tattoo type of device and that continuously monitor the health parameters. With this, we conclude. Thank you very much. And if there is any question, we are happy to take it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Well, that was a fantastic session by Dr. Satish sir and Ardi ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all the participants. All right. So let's call it a day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.